Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, what more can pro basketball star Brittney Griner put up with? Busted for hash oil, 10 months in a Russian jail, a mother and vocal supporter for the LGBTQ community. She was scheduled to be the keynote speaker at the Women Grow Educational Leadership Conference in Baltimore, but after checking into the Gaylord Hotel, she was greeted by this message scribbled on duct tape. Shaken by what is being called an anime meme, Brittney checked out.
Let me be clear about this. BG's not the only woman under attack. We all are, like literally.
Meanwhile, in the last week, 2 Americans were returned to the U.S. after cannabis-related airport busts. Last week, it was teacher Mark Fogel, who spent 4 years in a Russian jail. And this past week, a 28-year-old man from Ohio named Caleb Byers was busted with edible-infused jam. 10 days later, he was back home in the United States. And the number 1 state in revenue, California, continues to fail, with inactive licenses now outnumbering active ones. The big winners? The illicit market. Dina NAgib reports from the Golden State. And New York Governor Kathy Hochul wants to allow law enforcement officers to use the smell of cannabis as a reason to stop and suspect DUI drivers, while her state opens up their 300th dispensary. And could Switzerland be the first fully legal adult use country in Europe by next year? Our European correspondent Ben Stevens has that story and more from coast to coast to Canada. Cannabis coverage on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, PCMTV Productions' weekly roundup of cannabis news from the U.S., Canada, and now Europe. I'm Alaina Pinto. Okay, have you downloaded our PCMTV app yet? It is free and available in the App Store. I say this every week. It's also available in Google Play, or you can search, and by searching the QR code that's on your screen, you'll find it too. Just search for PCMTV if you are doing that in the App Store. Okay, first up, a disturbing story about the stigma and hate that many in the cannabis industry face every day. Last week, we interviewed the CEO of the Women Grow Educational Leadership Conference in Baltimore, Maryland, Dr. Chanda Macias. She was excited about the 2-day event her organization was hosting, and she was excited to welcome WNBA All-Star and Olympic gold medalist Brittney Griner as the keynote speaker, along with former NFL player Ricky Williams. The event was held at the Gaylord Hotel and Conference Center in the Inner Harbor in Baltimore. But when Brittney checked into her room, she was shaken to her core when she walked into her bathroom and found this message on a piece of duct tape: "Gay baby jail." Griner is an outspoken advocate for gay rights, a mother, and had a harrowing 10 months in a Russian jail. Griner pulled out of her speaking engagement with the support of the CEO of Women Grow, Dr. Macias. And last Friday, Dr. Macias talked with PCM founder Jimmy Young about the conference and the incident with Griner.
When did you find out that Brittney had this incident, and how was that communicated to you, and how quickly did it evolve into she's not going to be able to speak because she's so upset?
Well, it was a little bit more complicated than that, Jimmy. There was a lot going on during the conference, and I decided that when I was briefed on the situation, that I was going to support BG in anything she decided to do. And let me be clear about this. BG is not the only woman under attack. We all are, like literally. And when something happens to one of us, it does impact all of us. And the conference was a reminder of how women that come together and show strength in numbers with one uniform voice can truly make an impact. She was our keynote because she's the beacon of hope to us.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, she just inspires us all. I mean, you could try to find a way to be divisive or to try to separate us on our different values, but the truth is that when you represent hope and love and all the things, we want to know how we can continue that messaging. And it's just one of those moments where you have to say that women are under attack and we need to protect each other. We need to move forward in a uniform voice, and we need to be the agents of change.
There is some explanation that is being spun by reports out of Baltimore that Stay Gay Baby Jail is related to the anime community and is a gaming term. But whatever was the intent of the saying, the fact remains the message really upset Brittney. She's reportedly fine, though, at home now with her family. And this week, Russia announced that another American, 28-year-old Caleb Byers, was released after getting busted at the same Moscow airport that teacher Mark Fogel and Griner were busted at. 28-year-old Byers had been detained since February 7th and is now back in the U.S. Byers allegedly held infused marmalade or another form of edibles in his bags. There is some speculation by international reporters that this suddenly softening of the Russian-American relationship might have something to do with the efforts to end the war in Ukraine. However, because negotiations are at a critical stage, no one is willing to go on the record with that connection. Now let's start our state reports in California with Dina NAgib, who tells us that there are now more failed cannabis businesses than current licensed ones in her state. Here's Dina.
I'm Dina NAgib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest developments in California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. According to the Department of Cannabis Control's website, there are now 10,828 inactive and surrendered licenses in the state and only 8,514 active ones. The vast majority of the inactive licenses are related to growing cannabis, with over 7,100 inactive cultivation licenses. This is a sad milestone for California's hurting legal market, which now has only a fraction of operators compared with California's medical market that existed prior to legalization. A white paper out of Southern California explored the contents of 104 hemp products from 68 brands. The analysis found that almost all of the products contained synthetic cannabinoids and exceeded the federal hemp THC limits. In addition, more than half the products failed California hemp standards. The governor banned these products with emergency regulations last year, but the ban has been largely ignored, and these products are still widely available and not subject to the same testing requirements as the cannabis industry. That's it for California. I'm Dina NAgib for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Hi, I'm Mathew Friedlander, the owner of Skagit Organics, coming to you from the Washington State Capitol with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast. So we are down here today with the Cannabis Alliance, Washington's largest and most effective cannabis trade group, and we are talking to our legislators about all things cannabis down here in Washington. So we've got several cannabis bills that are still in the works. Most importantly, we are still trying to get home grow passed here in Washington. It is one of the few states that has a legal, regulated cannabis market that does not allow the growing of cannabis at home. It is a Class C felony to grow a single plant at home, whereas I go to work every day dealing with the plant that just doesn't seem right. So we are also trying to get a social consumption bill passed that would create a banquet license for cannabis, so you could have 1 or 2 events throughout the year, and cannabis would be allowed to be sold. Currently, there is nowhere in Washington that you can consume cannabis legally outside of your home. This poses a lot of problems for people who don't own their own home. Renters and the like have issues finding safe places to consume. So that's what I've got for you this week out of Washington. My name is Matthew, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Back on the East Coast in the state of New York, the cannabis industry continues to evolve. Now that state's attorney general, Letitia James, has won a $6 million civil court judgment against an unlicensed cannabis shop in Brooklyn. This is considered a major win in combating the out-of-control illicit cannabis market in that state. On top of that, the governor wants a bill that would allow the smell of weed in a car to be just cause for law enforcement to test a driver under the influence. Plus, the state passed a milestone with 300 total dispensaries now open. Here's Pam Schmiel with these stories and more in New York.
This is Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Pam Schmiel reporting from New York. Cannabis odor as evidence? New York Governor Hochul is pushing for police officers to use the smell of cannabis as evidence in drugged driving cases. Cassie White, a spokesperson for Hochul, told Spectrum News the administration is actively negotiating with the state legislature to keep New Yorkers safe from drugged driving while also maintaining their social equity goals. However, New York cannabis consultant Kaylin Castetter warns that those who work in the industry often leave their shifts smelling of cannabis because of its pungency. And Leaf Brands is coming to New York. Leaf Brands, a leading California-based extraction and manufacturing company, just made its first move as a multi-state operator by entering the New York cannabis market. Known for its distillate, hydrocarbon, and solventless extractions, Leaf has secured a 7,000 square foot facility in upstate New York and plans to start operations soon as part of their national expansion strategy. And New York continues to crack down on illegal shops. The New York Attorney General, Letitia James, just issued a $6 million judgment against a Brooklyn smoke shop for repeatedly ignoring orders from the Office of Cannabis Management and Enforcement to seize unlicensed operations. Meanwhile, a previous attempt to shut down an illegal cannabis shop in Queens was ruled unconstitutional by a judge last October. But if a shop is operating without a license, how unconstitutional is it really? That's this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Pam Schmiel reporting from New York.
Lots of action in state legislatures as states begin to challenge existing laws and make new ones. First up, in the Big Sky of Montana, where Republican senators trying to get adult use consumers to have to pay $200 for the right to purchase cannabis for recreational purposes. Plus, that state wants to record all transactions and the people who are making them. Kind of creepy, maybe? I mean, anyone who's visited a dispensary knows that security cameras are recording inside the store, but why does the state have to access that video when you already have to get your license or ID scanned when you check in? So the information is already recorded. But if you are a pro-cannabis consumer, you probably don't want to visit Idaho anytime soon. A bill is advancing in that state's legislature to set a minimum fine of $300 for possession of a small amount of cannabis product. It's still a misdemeanor, but that fine is a little excessive, right? $300. But it's a win for democracy in South Dakota. Cannabis advocates there passed a bill for their medical program a few years ago with a 70% approval. But Republicans in that state's Congress was trying to overturn that vote. A vote this week of 7-6 narrowly defeated that bill to overturn the vote and allow the medical cannabis program to continue to serve the 13,000 patients they serve in that state. No state medical program has ever been shut down by any legislation, and there are now 39 active in the United States. Meanwhile, Illinois' market continues to evolve, and that's why we look forward to hearing from Mark Allen, our Chicago clone guy from his state of Illinois. Here's Mark.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, reporting from Illinois for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Thanks for tuning in. This is Bird, hanging out like he's always doing, I love this guy. Chicago City Hall had a hemp hearing recently, and I watched that, and it was exciting. The CBAI, the Cannabis Business Association of Illinois, was there representing all the commercial craft growers, all the big business, while certain people, and actually Rod Knight, a cannabis hemp lawyer, was clarifying things for the local hemp people. So at the end of that, I think people are still divided and possibly even more confused, but I enjoyed watching it because it's going in the right direction. So that was very interesting. You can go on YouTube and look for that. That was pretty interesting. More state bills coming in. These politicians here are coming in hot this year. State Bill 1772 is going to help on-premise cannabis consumption. It's going to allow businesses to get a permit to have open consumption. So we're used to events and roller coaster rides and events and carnivals where there's a beer tent. They have to get a license for that alcohol consumption. Well, now the same is going to go for the cannabis, the flower. So a lot of places in the state now, it's going to be easier to get a license to have outdoor and indoor consumption of cannabis, which makes sense because you can smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol everywhere. So now they were talking about doing that with cannabis, which is pretty cool. Love hearing that coming through. That's also going to establish ventilation requirements for indoor establishments. Another state bill coming through is 1775, which I particularly really like. This is in regards to hemp regulation reform. It's an amendment to the Illinois Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Simply put, it states that any product sold shall not be considered adulterated if it contains legal hemp. But it also includes THC, cannabis, and everything else. So simply put, adulterated means not pure, nasty, bad. I had to look that up because I was thinking something along the divorce adultery. But no, so it's now, according to this state bill, anything with hemp, cannabis, THC will not be considered nasty, bad, or unsafe is kind of the way I took it. So that's a step in the right direction, making cannabis more legit and more normalized. But I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy. This is Bird reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Thanks for tuning in.
Last week, we told you about how some governors are threatening to increase taxes on the cannabis industry to make up for revenue shortfalls in their states. Case in point is Michigan, where their governor, Gretchen Whitmer, used to be a hero for the cause of legalization, but now the industry is going to turn on her faster than you can fill up your bong. Here's our Michigan Weedster, Amy Carter, with more from her state.
I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters, bringing you this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Today, we're focusing on a brewing storm in Michigan's cannabis industry. Michigan's regulated cannabis is facing a significant challenge as Governor Gretchen Whitmer proposes a 32% wholesale tax on recreational marijuana. This tax is part of her budget plan to generate $470 million for road repairs, but industry leaders warn that it could spell disaster for an already struggling market. With cannabis sales dipping for the first time in years and production capacity at its all-time high, operators are concerned that this tax could be the tipping point. Many are already dealing with unsustainable prices and razor-thin margins, and the shift to monthly tax payments could push smaller retailers out of business. The backlash against the proposal is growing, with numerous industry stakeholders expressing their frustration over what they see as betrayal. Many feel blindsided, especially those who supported Whitmer's earlier cannabis reform efforts. The proposed tax hike is particularly worrisome for small businesses and social equity applicants who face the greatest financial strain. To make matters worse, unregulated hemp-derived products are cutting into the market share of licensed operators, creating an uneven playing field. As other states also consider higher excise taxes, Michigan's unique oversupply situation makes it particularly vulnerable. For now, the Michigan cannabis community remains determined to fight back against these new challenges. The struggle to protect this hard-fought industry continues. Stay tuned as we keep you updated on this and more. That's it for this week's Michigan News. I'm Amy Carter with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the A block, or first section of our weekly Cannabis Coast to Coast news report. But next, we go international. We'll check in on what's going on in Europe and tell you about a Central American country that's about to go legal. That and more in our state reports on Cannabis Coast to Coast news coming up next.
Ready to take your craft to the next level? Imagine faster extractions, purer products, and more profits. Sounds good, right? At Pure 5 Extraction, we've revolutionized cannabis extraction with our game-changing technology. No solvents, no heat, just the cleanest, most natural process on the market. Whether you're a boutique grower or a large-scale operation, Pure 5 has the tools to elevate your business worldwide. Visit pure5extraction.com today. Pure 5 Extraction, because your plants deserve the best.
Welcome back to the B Block, our second section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news. I'm Alaina Pinto. There is a Central American nation that is moving forward with their medical cannabis reforms. The Ministry of Health in Costa Rica announced regulations to start the production and sale of medicinal products that will take place at pharmacies. The regulations introduced outline administrative requirements, health and patient registration, product specs, and advertising. Only doctors will be able to prescribe the product to patients. Meanwhile, there's a European nation that is ready to launch a full-blown adult use program, and our European correspondent, Ben Stevens, has the story of Switzerland's reform that could be launched in 2026.
With Business of Cannabis with this week's European Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Switzerland has catapulted itself into pole position to become the first European country to launch a fully fledged adult use cannabis market. This week, a new draft for a federal law, which would enable citizens to grow, buy, possess and consume cannabis, was passed with a convincing majority of 14-9. The National Council's Social Security and Health Committee, in an increasingly common justification for attempts at cannabis reform across Europe, cited public health and youth protection for their ambitious proposals, and said that cannabis consumption is a social reality. Should this draft be adopted, which experts believe could happen by next year, Swiss citizens would be able to cultivate up to 3 plants at home, as already seen in Malta and Germany. Crucially, however, they would also be able to purchase cannabis for recreational purposes from licensed retailers and online. As discussed last week, a similar bill is being pushed through Parliament in the Czech Republic. However, a crucial difference is that Switzerland is not part of the European Union, whereas the Czech Republic is. This would potentially make the passage of the bill a smoother process, though legislators will still have to contend with international regulations surrounding the free movement of goods, as it is still part of the single market. This has been a sticking point for previous attempts to legalise cannabis in countries like Germany and Luxembourg. Elsewhere, the Italian hemp industry has received unexpected support from the centre-right Forza Italia party, strengthening its position against an existential threat from its own government. This comes after the European Commission also confirmed that it is set to launch an investigation into the legality of the government's efforts to render all commercial activities surrounding industrial hemp illegal. To clarify, industrial hemp in this context means cannabis with a THC content of less than 0.2%, meaning it is entirely non-intoxicating. Should this inflammatory bill be imposed, it is expected to lead to the closure of 3,000 businesses and the loss of 15,000 jobs supported by the hemp industry. While the industry is still fighting for its survival, the tide appears to be turning in its favour. That's all for this week's European Cannabis Report. I'm Ben Stevens, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Continuing with the international theme, the entire country of Canada is celebrating their impressive 3-2 overtime win over the USA in the Four Nations hockey tournament this past week. Not sure if it was even noticed by the cannabis community in that country, but Debbie Facey has some other news items that are all about the legal sale and use of cannabis in her country, Canada.
This is Debbie Facey with your Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis Report. So what we have in Canada this week is MediFirms has canceled their $5.5 million investment when it comes to the Napanee, Ontario facility due to unkept agreements met. This is something that is going to obviously be refunded to MediFirms, but it is unfortunate for the industry to see that they were not able to actually meet the needs that needed to be up to standards and codes. Next, what we have is the infused chocolate experience, especially when it comes to our edibles in Canada, has been on the rise, especially due to the fact that it's just a lot easier to consume. It's cold outside, people don't want to smoke outside, I understand. So overall, we've seen a 9.4 increase over the last year versus last year, and that's a bonus, especially for all of our edible companies. And last we have is a recap of me attending the Hush Hush event that it debuted the MTL Low Key new lines and strains, as well as Lot 420 and the sauce. This is Debbie Facey with your Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis Report. Peace.
One of the most active international companies in cannabis is Curaleaf. The publicly traded multi-state operator already has a sizable interest in the European market, and they are positioning themselves to be a major player in that continent as the fight for acceptance continues. Here's our man, High on Wall Street, Doug Miller.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In the next few months, cannabis testing labs in New Jersey, they will be subject to new labeling requirements and must obey new action limits under recently approved rules. For the first time, New Jersey now has its own testing standards after having followed Maryland's cannabis testing protocols since 2021. Under the new rules approved by the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission, the CRC, on February 18th, the maximum batch size for usable cannabis is now 33.07 pounds. That's down from 100 pounds. And the product labels must include content of THCA, CBDA, CBG, CBGA, and CBN, and of course THC and CBD. And there's also new action limits for a long list of contaminants, the CRC noted. So let's look at Curaleaf. They've been operating in New Jersey, and they're the largest MSO. So let's see how their stock chart looks. It's trading around $1.41, and it's been way down for some time now. So I've been watching it to see if it can start moving up, because it is trying to set up. So I'll keep an eye on it and keep you guys posted. And remember, trade smart, lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Over the past few weeks, we've told you stories about a number of state governors and legal states who want to tap into their cannabis businesses for even more taxes. That is something the industry is extremely fearful of considering. It is already overtaxed and overregulated, while the illicit market thrives and the hemp market continues to grow. Ohio may only be 6 months into their adult use launch, but their governor, Mike DeWine, is not making any friends or gaining much support for his wish to have their new tax revenue stream from the sale of cannabis increase. Here's Christina Brisson with the Ohio Report, sponsored by Yellow Labs, with 40 dispensaries in that state and more coming to Massachusetts.
In Willow Creek, Rory, renowned for birdwatching, embraced nature's elegance. Preparing for his woodland sojourn, he used grape-focused THC mist from Yellow Labs. Each spritz honed his senses, capturing avian beauty. Immersed in the forest symphony, Rory's lens froze vibrant moments. Emerging at twilight, gratitude filled him for the mist's clarity. Recalling, find Yellow Labs near you. Rory ordered more of his mist from
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Last week I mentioned Governor DeWine and the proposed changes he was wanting to make, and in his new budget he's suggesting that we increase the tax on adult use cannabis and then turn around and use that money to build jails and police training, instead of using it for the various community funds. This as Ohio sales exceed over $319 million. But in other good news, this last weekend at a Cincinnati suburban farmers market, they had 30 vendors set up and you're allowed to buy seeds, immature plants, and clones. Hope to see more of that to come. Thank you. I'm Christina Brisson with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Ohio Cannabis Report is supported by Yellow Labs and BetterWaysToTHC.com. Search for Yellow Labs near me and find one of 40 dispensaries in Ohio carrying these amazing mists and creams.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. More news from the Arizona State Capitol this week. A bill restricting cannabis advertising passed the House with bipartisan support. The legislation aims to protect kids by banning ads targeting under 21s and limiting billboard placements. Meanwhile, Senator TJ Shope has done a 180 on hemp-derived cannabinoids. After some education, he's now pushing for regulation rather than prohibition. Speaking of education, there were 2 recent cannabis education events in Tucson. The Elevate Your Knowledge AZ Cannabis and Adaptive Sports panel, sponsored by TrueLeaf, included athletes and TrueLeaf's medical director. Discussion centered around cannabis's role in training, recovery, and managing sports injuries. Green Culture ED also held a responsible cannabis vendor training in the Old Pueblo. In a similar vein, Arizona public radio station KJZZ is hosting a new podcast, Reefer Growing Madness. It takes listeners behind the scenes of a massive indoor marijuana grow operation in Arizona, tracking the plant's journey from clone to consumption. The series explores the history of cannabis in the U.S. and offers an inside look at the modern marijuana industry. And lastly, the sale of THC-infused drinks at Arizona's Total Wine & More has sparked controversy. While Total Wine believes the sales are legal under the 2018 Farm Bill, dispensaries argue it creates an uneven playing field by bypassing Arizona's cannabis safety regulations. The debate continues as lawmakers and industry stakeholders grapple with regulating this new frontier in cannabis commerce. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Minnesota's cannabis market is taking off with tribal nations leading the way. The Prairie Island Indian community just opened a huge 13-acre cannabis farm under its Island Pezzi brand, producing over 10,000 pounds of cannabis. Other tribes like Red Lake, White Earth, Mille Lacs are expanding too, especially since state licensing is delayed. The White Earth Band of Chippewa is making big moves, opening a dispensary in Moorhead next month, then another in St. Cloud this spring. The Moorhead shop will be Minnesota's first off-reservation dispensary once an agreement is locked in. Well, Big One Mesquite, White Earth's cannabis brand, started in 2023. CEO Zach Wilson wants to expand into Mankato plus Rochester next. Right now, only tribal lands can sell recreational cannabis. White Earth plus Red Lake got a head start by launching medical sales back in 2020. Minnesota legalized marijuana in 2023, but lawsuits delayed licensing, so retail shops won't open until 2025.
The state scrapped its lottery system in December after the cannabis director resigned last month. New lotteries are expected this spring, but it could still take months before shops open. In Nevada, on February 20th, PBS's Nevada Week, the cannabis economy featured experts breaking down cannabis issues in the state. Here's what you need to know. 31% of Nevada's cannabis market is illegal, unregulated. High taxes make legal marijuana expensive. Tourists often buy from illegal sellers they find on Google or social media without realizing it. So what's being done? Agencies like the Cannabis Compliance Board plus law enforcement are working on better enforcement. Also, tourist-friendly delivery services and more. The goal? Make Las Vegas the gold standard for legal cannabis, just like they did with casinos. That's it for the Nevada highlights and Tribal Nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B Block, but we have more reports from legal adult use states from all over the country, including Virginia's Joe Parsons. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
President Trump's nominee to head the DEA, Terry Cole, will play an important role in the future of the industry and being handled.
It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Now, let me tell you my cannabis story. You know, I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore. So I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weejits filtration system. What? The Weejits.com, Weejits, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. The guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. Now, add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weejits.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. A final reminder that if you want to continue to follow our documentation of the fight to end cannabis prohibition, you should scan the QR code on the screen, and that'll take you to the App Store or to Google Play. And on that App Store, you can find the most watched news programs and interviews that are all part of the documentation of this movement. All you got to do is search for PCMTV, download the app, and get going. Next up, it's more state reports. Here's Joe Parsons in Virginia.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection and Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Could Virginia's reverse track on adult use and cannabis reform be the future of the entire industry moving forward? President Trump's nominee to head the DEA, Terry Cole, will play an important role in the future of the industry, and being handpicked by Governor Youngkin to be Virginia's Secretary of Public Safety may very well answer that question. Terry Cole has a degree in criminal justice from the Rochester Institute of Technology, leadership credentials from Notre Dame's Mendoza, and the University of Virginia. He joined the U.S. Naval Academy in was a blue and gold officer. After that, he joined the DEA, where he served for 22 years. He was a special agent and investigator in Oklahoma, and later served in Colombia and Afghanistan. He was named the agency's chief of staff and executive officer in Washington, D.C. He retired from the DEA in 2020 as the acting regional director overseeing operations in Canada, Central America, and Mexico. He has a proven track record and a strong stance on justice, and has over 30 years of law enforcement. So, on paper, sounds like a perfect choice, right? Well, not if you're an advocate for cannabis legalization. In 2023, Terry Cole was appointed by Governor Glenn Youngkin to be Virginia's Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. In that position, he was in charge of 11 public safety agencies, including overseeing the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority, and made his position clear that he entirely agreed with the governor last year when he vetoed the Cannabis Adult Use Bill and other cannabis reform bills that have had strong support in the Commonwealth. While being a champion in preventing trafficking in other drugs like cocaine and heroin, he looks at cannabis the same way as he does any other Schedule I substance. He shares the same position the first former lady, Nancy Reagan. Just say no. After a visit 10 months ago to the VCCA, he made his position clear on the now infamous LinkedIn post, where he said, "Everybody knows my stance on marijuana after 30 plus years in law enforcement, so don't even ask." He followed it with the hashtags, "Just Say No," "Not Legal for Distribution," "Health Issues," and a few others that signal a prohibitionist opinion. Governor Youngkin praised his nomination and said in a statement, he will put the safety and security of Americans first as the head of the DEA. It's a good day to be an American, but a bad day to be a drug dealer. President Trump has also praised Terry Cole, but it is important to note that Terry Cole was not his first choice for the position. That would be Chad Cronester, a Florida sheriff that withdrew his nomination in December, but that's another story for another episode. For now, we do not know what Terry Cole will actually do to either hinder or help the cannabis industry. But if you ask me, if anyone thinks Terry Cole is going to help reschedule cannabis or help legalize the plant medicine, you must be smoking something. Well, that's going to do it for this week's Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
In Washington, D.C., the ominous reaction from the industry and their picks to head up the DEA and other government bodies has caused a lot of concern. And now some doctors are suing the DEA over their unfair handling of a rescheduling hearing that pretty much banned any pro-cannabis organization. It'll be interesting to watch what happens when a devout prohibitionist, Terrence Cole, takes over the already ongoing rescheduling initiative that was started under the previous administration. It's not something that organization's new leader wants to deal with and will probably fight it from happening. With more from our nation's capital, here's Andrew Behringer.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Now, in a recent move that's raising some eyebrows across the cannabis industry, President Donald Trump has nominated Terrence C. Cole to head the Drug Enforcement Administration. Now, Cole, who would become the fourth DEA leader in just 4 months, brings a controversial stance on cannabis policy to the role. Now, President Trump's latest pick for DEA administrator is no stranger to the DEA. Terrence Cole, who currently is Virginia's Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, brings over 3 decades of law enforcement experience to the table, including 22 years with the DEA itself. But it's Cole's hardline stance on cannabis that's drawing the attention. The nominee has repeatedly endorsed Reagan-era Just Say No policies and recently shared controversial claims about cannabis becoming 4 times more dangerous than in previous decades. While Cole has cited statistics about increased cannabis potency and youth impacts, advocacy groups note that there has not been provided supporting evidence for these claims. This appointment comes at a very crucial moment as the DEA considers still rescheduling cannabis to a Schedule III status, a move that drew over 43,000 public comments under the Biden administration. Despite Cole's anti-cannabis position, Trump himself has expressed support for rescheduling on the campaign trail. Cole's nomination follows a rough period for the DEA leadership. And before he can take the helm, Cole must secure a Senate confirmation, a process that could prove difficult given his controversial views on drug policy. Well, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
We have a new correspondent to welcome to our news team. His name is Christopher Bright, and he will be following the scene in Maryland. The governor there, Wes Moore, became part of cannabis reform history last year. He expunged the records of over 170,000 people in his state who had nonviolent cannabis violations. He was honored this week at the Women Grow Conference in Baltimore.
Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice, bringing you this week's top cannabis headlines from Maryland. Governor Wes Moore was honored with the Social Impact Award at the Women's Grow Leadership Summit for pardoning over 175,000 individuals convicted of misdemeanor drug offenses. His historic pardons, enacted in June 2024, included more than 150,000 for cannabis possession and over 18,000 for drug paraphernalia. He felt honored by the recognition and was proud of his commitment to social justice. Wes Moore spoke briefly to accept his reward.
I am honored to receive this recognition from Women Grow. Maryland is committed to building a competitive, innovative cannabis industry that drives economic growth. And since awarding 205 conditional licensees last July, we've taken other bold steps forward, including pardoning 175,000 cannabis charges, the largest state-level pardon in American history, clearing the path for a new era. I've also introduced the Expungement Reform Act of 2025 to continue expanding pathways to work, wages, and wealth for those with minor cannabis offenses. Through partnerships like Women Grow, we're building a robust business ecosystem, and women entrepreneurs are leading the way. Our investment in development programs and technical assistance demonstrates Maryland's commitment to positioning our state as a leader in the cannabis industry. As our licensees prepare to launch operations, Maryland is poised to become a hub for innovation and job creation. So, I'm proud of the work we've gotten done in Maryland, but there's a lot more we still have to do.
Additionally, Moore nominated Tabitha Robinson as the leader of the Maryland Cannabis Administration. Robinson, who is still awaiting a Senate confirmation, previously worked on social equity licensing in New York. And now we have our Content Creator of the Week. I would like to acknowledge a local content creator, CJ, who's also known as Wash Your Grass Co., for his expertise in hash making. Consider following him for high quality services, or if you have any questions about cultivation and pressing. This has been this week's Maryland Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright, the Enlightened Voice, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Bill paying by the cannabis industry continues to be an issue that is becoming more and more typical. One of the largest cannabis operators in the country is Innovative Industrial Products, who own quite a bit of real estate, including grow houses, dispensaries, and manufacturing facilities all over the country. PharmaCann is a multi-state operator that is struggling to pay the rent to IIP. In fact, PharmaCann is abandoning facilities in Michigan and Massachusetts, while their landlords, the Innovative Industrial Products Company, has agreed to a rent reduction for PharmaCann. Well, now the shareholders of IIP are suing that company for not being honest about the depth of the non-payment of rents. The states of Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire all have medical programs for cannabis, but all three have drawn the line on the recreational world of adult use. But all three are trying again, and the only governor who is on record saying he will sign it into law is Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. But this week in New Hampshire, a bill passed through the House of Representatives to legalize cannabis consumption for adults. But before you get your hopes up, there have been a half dozen attempts to legalize cannabis for adults, including one that passed the Senate and the House, only to be vetoed by then Governor Chris Sununu. Now, with a new governor, Kelly Ayotte, House reps want to try again, despite the governor's stance that she would veto any bill that tries to legalize the plant. This bill does not offer cultivation or distribution licenses, but will allow for possession if you are an adult over 21. In Oklahoma, Chinese nationals continue to open commercial growing facilities only to be shut down time and time again. That's not about to change in that state anytime soon. So here's Kimmy Cannabis with more from Oklahoma.
I am Kimmy Cannabis from Canna Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Oklahoma has been weeding out businesses as new regulations took effect, and the numbers show a clear decline across the industry. Comparing February 2024 to February 2025, we're seeing drops in patient registration and cannabis business licenses. The number of registered cannabis patients has decreased by almost 6,000, while caregivers have declined as well. The biggest shifts are in the business sector. Growers have fallen from 4,347 to 2,939. Dispensaries have dropped, and processors have dropped as well. Transport companies also have taken a hit, shrinking from 98 to 70. Even testing labs have dipped slightly. One category that remains unchanged is waste disposal companies, holding steady at 10 both years. These declines reflect the impact of rule changes, excessive fines, and regulatory obstacles like fire marshal approvals. And with 33 new regulations under consideration, the industry could see even more shifts in the coming months. This is a critical time for Oklahoma's cannabis community. Will these regulations stabilize the market or force even more businesses out? We'll be watching. That's it for this week's Oklahoma Cannabis Update. I'm Kimmy Cannabis with the Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And finally this week, did you happen to see the 50th anniversary show for Saturday Night Live last Sunday, the 16th? Cannabis and the cast of Saturday Night Live has always been one of those facts that many people knew about, but never really made a big deal over. And now with the plant medicine legal in New York, you would think that cast members would be more open about it. But current grower and actor Jim Belushi is on record saying that if cannabis was legal in New York in the 70s, when his brother John was a regular on that show, he would still be alive. Kate McKinnon made a reference where she said, "This weekend is so epic, I've already run out of marijuana." There was also a few barbs targeting Martha Stewart and Will Ferrell, mentioning the thick fog of chronic backstage. You also had Woody Harrelson resurrecting his hippie dude character from a 2014 sketch. And all in all, it was truly an epic event. And who knows if there will be another one in 25 years, which would be the 75th anniversary. That would be really cool. That'll do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume responsibly, and we will see you next week.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Welcome to Pro Cannabis Media, your go-to for all things cannabis. PCM is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news and talk shows with a twist. We've got 16 state correspondents and multimedia journalists from around the US and Canada.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with Big Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Green Finger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters.
Andrew Behringer here reporting from Washington, D.C.
It's Debbie Facey with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
It all started back in 2018 when founder Jimmy Young kicked off the In the Weeds podcast. His mission? Documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition. Fast forward to today and we've got Cannabis Coast to Coast with Alaina Pinto, delivering the nation's only TV-style cannabis news show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast, PCMTV's weekly roundup of industry news from California to New York. I'm Alaina Pinto.
As of August 2024, PCM has racked up over 1.2 million views and 14.5 million impressions on our YouTube channel. With 15,000 subscribers and growing, our reach is spreading like wildfire. PCM's website, YouTube, Rumble, Discord, Roku, Twitch, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and even our very own PCMTV app. Get your cannabis news fix with Pro Cannabis Media. We're here to keep you informed and entertained. Stay tuned and stay lifted.